Hello and welcome to the 2009 National Indigenous Studies Conference. This year's conference theme was on perspectives of urban life, connection and reconnection. I got around to speaking to some of the people who attended the conference, and here are some of their thoughts and stories.
I was born in the country and I'm from the Wiradjuri people, and I'm actually the first generation of my family on both sides to actually be urban. I've been in Canberra for like about 25 years now, and when I first came here I thought it was really hectic and really impersonal, and I couldn't really relate to the kind of lifestyle that was here. But it didn't really take me long to start to realise, and I guess this is the really good thing about being urban now, that I think is that wherever you are, there's lots of different communities here in Canberra, but like you can be in a shopping mall or in a queue or at a public function or like anywhere in a big crowd, and you just hear this expression like solid or deadly or bras or cars or something, and straight away, and you turn around and people that you don't know but who, because Canberra's got a big eclectic Aboriginal community, will recognise you, and it's like Sona, like even though there's heaps of people here and maybe urban Aboriginal people don't always look that different, it's sort of like Sona, and I'm just amazed about how we track each other down.
Always kind of bothered me with the government putting us into these categories of urban, rural, remote. But the problem I've got is that my traditional land in Brisbane is in Brisbane. So they've built a city on my traditional land, and the similar experience with the Gold Coast, but more recently. So these people are supposedly traditional people living in an urban environment. So are they urban Aboriginal people, or what are they? So that's the issue we've got, and I think a lot of times that the urban categorisation was given to people in the context that you're not quite as Aboriginal as perhaps a non-urban Aboriginal person. Yep. But in the situation of Gold Coast or even Canberra, the local Aboriginal people, of course, will be disputing that. So that's why it makes foundation for interesting discussion.
I remember we grew up in a small town my first years, and then we went to Rockhampton, which is a larger town. There'd be 70,000 people live in Rockhampton now, so it's not small, but not overly big. So most of our time was spent there, but I remember, Dad was a ringer, so he worked on properties, so we lived on properties. I remember one part when he couldn't find work, we lived in a town camp in a place called Claremont, which is an experience. And I always tell people, you grow up and you remember a whole lot of things. I can't remember ever being hungry, but I remember eating heaps of strange food, So Dad would go out and hunt for us, and we'd be eating kangaroo and plain turkeys and all that sort of stuff.
Well, two reasons. I think I wanted to give a Redfern viewpoint that was very urban, obviously, and would counter the misunderstanding about Redfern and the length of history and time that people were involved in Redfern. But secondly, I think it's timely to remind ourselves that the vast majority of Aboriginal people live in urban or big metropolitan or regional centres. And in reality, I think in the past we haven't had that focus. This was a great opportunity to focus on that.
I think the conference, Urban Representations, is a really important and significant event on the Indigenous calendar for academia in particular and for community. And I think that the diversity that's represented here at the conference today is a demonstration of how significant an issue that is, and the topics that are covered in all the presentations are just absolutely fantastic. And for me as an Aboriginal woman, it's really significant in terms of that there are lots of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people getting up and doing the main presentations, and that is just fabulous.
Yeah, it's pretty hard back around Rwanda in them days, but we moved down to Sydney. I went to a hostel down there called Kirinari, and now just sort of working yourself around back down the Bree and back down this way, Sydney and all that, yeah.
And whereabouts in Sydney were you?
I'm at Mount Druitt, mate, yeah.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And so you've come down for this Urban Experience Conference, and what do you hope to get out of it?
Well, just some more knowledge and that about health and all that there, especially Koori health and that, mental health and that.
I've worked in Aboriginal health for the last 19 years now, doing a Masters at the moment in epidemiology, and looking at doing grad medicine next year. And I just think it's really important for everyone to come together and support each other, because sometimes, you know, you're doing the best that you can for your people, and sometimes you wonder if it's getting anywhere. So I think being able to attend something where everyone else is gathering and sharing stories, it's a way to feel supported.
Yeah, I grew up in Tassie back in the 70s. You know, Tassie was a very isolated place, and especially being a black fella down there, as you know, the system of who we were as a people, our identity was always one of not knowing. You know, we were told by our mother and our grandmother and that you know, you're Aboriginal, but it didn't really mean a lot. And you know, I left there back in the late 70s, joined the Navy, travelled the world, and come back and settled in Melbourne. But ever since then, I've lived in rural, remote, urban communities. You know, whether it's out in the bush, lived in Darwin, Central Desert, you know, the Kimberleys, the Pilbara. But I keep coming back to the urban environment because that's where I feel like I belong. And belonging's a lot to do with who you are. And you know, I feel now that the Aboriginal community in Victoria is my family, or my extended family. And that's where I feel comfortable at now.
My brother and I often got into disputes, often got into physical confrontations about challenges as to who we were, why we thought a particular way, why we related to certain issues, perhaps more strongly than others. And it was a continual sort of, not so much a battle, but a continual effort to try to assert one's Aboriginality in that context. Whether it be in the school, or in the sporting context, or in a social context, we're always called upon to try to justify our existence, justify our family, and why we might, you know, have continual visitations of family mob coming from country and all that sort of stuff that would often stay with my family. And those sorts of kinship interactions were always contested by our colleagues, our friends, and the wider community within that area. And I mean, why that is so has to do with the history of black-white relationships in this country, and quite frankly has to do with the non-understanding and lack of knowledge by non-Indigenous people about our mob and who we are and why we do what we do.
But there's also this vibrant Aboriginal culture and identity in urban centres. People fiercely defend their identity and stand up for it, because it's no less legitimate than people living in a rural area or in a remote area. Aboriginality comes in very different forms and different styles and shapes and sizes. No one single identity is possible. It's a myriad of identities and characters and personalities that make up Aboriginal Australia, including those who live in urban areas.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people really have to make a stand and get up and have their say, and make sure that their voices are heard to the right people and to government. Otherwise, nothing's going to change for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.